What's up, my producer friends? I'm David with anothermonsterproductions.com. Today I'm back with another Sytrus sound design tutorial, but I actually want to do something a little bit different in this tutorial. So I've been getting a lot of requests from people to make a certain type of bass sound, and I've been getting questions about how to go about making specific bass sounds. So in this video, what I want to do is touch a little bit more on the theory of how you would actually go about trying to create your own specific bass sound, whatever you're going for. So I'm going to touch on kind of some universal, like basic sound design stuff. And ultimately, this tutorial is going to be a little bit less about how to make a specific sound and more about how to approach making whatever sound you want to make. So hopefully you guys like this tutorial. Let me know in the comments down below if you do. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get straight into it. All right, so first things first, let's go ahead and get an initialized preset. We can go to presets, go to default, and this will get us a blank slate to go ahead and work with. So by default, we're going to have just a basic sine wave. Sounds like that. So the first thing that I want to mention here is that our basic sine wave is actually just a single note with no extra harmonics on it. It's a very pure waveform, so it sounds very clean, and it actually works really well for sub bass. So if I were to just bring the pitch down here a couple octaves, then I have a sub bass just by playing something. So depending on the type of bass you want to create, this can be a good place to start. Now, one way to get extra harmonics on the sine wave would be to go ahead and just do a little bit of FMing. And we can actually modulate operator 1 by itself by just doing this a little bit. It kind of creates a bass tone that sounds like it has a little bit of distortion or saturation on it. Obviously, the more FMing you do, the more distorted it becomes and the more it starts to sound like a saw wave. So that pretty much just sounds like a sawtooth wave. So if we bring it, somewhere here in the middle, that might be a good starting place for you to potentially create a bass from that. Another option would be to, here, let me just get rid of that. Another option would be to just go into our operator 1, check out the different wave shapes that we have access to. So right here, we have our sine wave, as you can see. I can slide this up, actually, I can slide it up like this. So this would be a triangle wave. That would be a sawtooth wave. That's our square wave. And this is sort of a variation of our square wave there. So we have some different wave shapes. These are actually our 4 basic wave shapes. And potentially you can use different wave shapes to try and have a starting point for whatever bass you're creating. So if you're thinking of creating maybe more of a heavily distorted sounding, lot of harmonic content bass, then maybe you want to start with a saw wave and see if you can figure out, your bass sound by starting there. And there's really not necessarily a right or wrong way to approach this. Once you start to understand the fundamentals of sound design, which, by the way, I do have a video which I recommend you checking out if you haven't yet, which is going to teach you all the basic fundamental sound design information that you need to know in order to start being able to listen to things and start being able to kind of recreate your own sounds from scratch. So check that video out if you haven't. I'll be sure to leave a link in the description and then also something that'll pop up on the screen now. But I think in most cases, I'm probably going to want to start with the sine wave, maybe add a little bit of harmonics like this. So that honestly just by itself kind of sounds a little bit like a realistic bass. And then if I mess with the attack, decay, sustain, and release, which is in our envelope section of our synth, and that's going to be universal to pretty much any synthesizer that you're working with. So within Sytrus, if we go into our volume tab and then our envelope tab, we can enable it and we can kind of shape the sound that we're going for. So if I want like kind of a plucky sounding bass, then I can do something like this. And it kind of sounds like almost like a stand-up bass being plucked. So from here, if you like this initial sort of concept, you could experiment with maybe adding some effects on it. You could route it through a filter, which is what I do a lot. How I would do that is I would bring the out here to 0, and then I would bring it all the way out there, and then I would bring it up here. So now it's being routed through the filter, and I can go into my filter and I can mess with the cutoff. And I can cut off some more of those extra harmonics if I wanted to. And I could change the type of filter that I'm using too. So right now I'm using a state variable filter, which is in low pass mode. So it's the same thing as using a low pass filter. So just some options to mess with there. I could go ahead and bring this all the way up to add more harmonics into it. And then now that it's running through the filter, I can just use the cutoff to cut off more or less frequencies. So we can listen to that. Add some resonance. Resonance is how you get that sort of acid-based sound where you like super squelchy sounding. So that's another thing you can mess with. Now let's go ahead and bring that back down. I'll go back into my operator 1. And so if you don't want a plucky bass, then you can just get rid of the envelope and then it'll just play a normal note. Just a pure sine wave, add a little bit of distortion. Now we can go into our operator 2 and we can start actually adding another layer on this if we wanted to. So maybe I'll try adding a triangle wave this time. Let me go ahead and bring that in here. So this is where we would bring it in our matrix, just on the filter 2, it's going in and then going out. And then I could potentially bring this down another octave. So now we have a note playing that is an octave apart, so it's actually 2 different notes. So that could be something you could experiment with. Maybe you want to go back into the envelope, mess with the attack, decay, sustain, release to make a different sort of shape. And then the last thing that you may want to experiment with is the LFO, which in the case of Sytrus, in order to use the LFO properly, you're going to want to delete all these points and then bring this up, and it'll have like the LFO shape that you want. So then you can enable it, you can link it to the tempo, and you can kind of, well, here, let's take a listen. And because I only have that on my operator 2, it's only doing it on the operator 2 right now. So if I were to turn this off, so that's how you change the speed of the LFO right there, and then you can mess with that. Now, another way we could go about doing this, I could bring this in, I could turn this off, and then I can go into my filter and I can actually do the LFO in my filter. And that way I know that the LFO is going to be enabled on, oh, I just added an extra point. That way I know the LFO is actually going to be enabled on both operators, or if I wanted to even add another operator, all that's going to be running through the filter, which is going to have my LFO on it. And then you can change the way, the shape, like the shape of it by messing with this. You can skew it, so move it off the grid, make it more of like a jagged, like a hard hit, and then so you have a pretty good amount of flexibility there you can mess with. Now, the last thing that I want to mention is that you can get your bass sounding pretty good inside Sytrus, but sort of the next step, the key to really getting your sounds to sound really professional and next level is in the post-processing. So that's where you're going to want to actually load that Sytrus, load that preset up into your mixer, and you're going to want to start doing some processing on it. So depending on the genre, a really good go-to plugin that you could use is OTT, which is a free plugin. I'll be sure to leave a link in the description if you guys want to get that. That looks like this. Basically, it's just a multi-band compressor. Very simple to use. It's a very common plugin. I've talked about it in the past. So it is a multi-band compressor. It has upward, downward compression capabilities. And then the main knob that you're going to want to worry about is just the depth knob here. And this controls the amount of compression that you're getting. You can get away with pretty subtle amounts. Sometimes I use as little as like, just a couple percent up to like maybe 10%. Sometimes I like to go higher depending on the sound. But that's a plugin that you can mess with. You can mess with EQs, you can mess with other compressors, you can mess with flangers, phasers, distortion, of course, saturation. Those are both good ones for basses. Could even add a sound goodizer on here. I mean, sound goodizer is basically multi-band compression with probably a little bit of saturation. And you can actually check out the presets in Maximus. Maximus has the presets for what the 4 different presets for sound goodizer in it, so you can see exactly what sound goodizer is actually doing. But the post-processing is where you're going to be able to kind of tweak that sound, get it really how you want it to sound, and feel free to stack stuff on top of each other. So you could do multiple OTTs if you needed to, multiple EQs, multiple compressors, whatever you need and whatever you have to shape the sound that you're going for. Definitely feel free to utilize that. Have fun in the process, experiment. So I hope this video was helpful for you. I know I kept it pretty short. I didn't want to really like convolute this video and show you a bunch of different possible variations of what I'm talking about. I mean, I covered everything that you really need to know in order to make your own bass sounds and how to potentially go about approaching this. And really it's just experimentation. It's using your ear, listening to see what bass you're trying to replicate, and then trying to understand the characteristics of what potentially goes into making that bass. Anyway, definitely check out that introduction to synthesis and sound design video that I was talking about. I'll be sure to go ahead and put that video up on the screen now if you guys want to check that out. And by the way, I do have a Discord server, which I started fairly recently, and we're doing live Q&As every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So join the Discord if you have any questions about production, and I'll see you guys in the next video.